Hey YouTube, this is Dave, and today I'm going to make a video and explain to some people, especially the beginners, what's the difference between R4 cards and what you really need to get this whole thing going. You have a Nintendo 3DS or a Nintendo DS, whether it's an XL or regular size, it won't really matter, but what does matter is when you buy one of these cards here. And these cards here are for, this one is for the 3DS, and what you can do is you can place this card into your Nintendo system, and in combination you have this little micro SD card here, and you put it inside the card into a little slot in the top here, and when you get this card, you can put it inside one of these USB readers and go on to the particular website for each one of these R4 cards that you can buy. And the R4 card is just the same size and the same setting as a regular card that like Nintendo would make. And you take this little card, you put it into this, and then you go onto a particular website and you download like a firmware for it. Now these cards have like CPU chips in it, and you could store your games on it, the game saves, and you could put DS games. You can't put 3DS games, but you could put SNES games, Game Boy games, and every single one of these cards have different websites. Like this one in particular is www.r4ids.cn. Now you might find other cards that will have close to the same website, but they might add something in between. There are a lot of clones out there. There are some high-end cards that you can get that will allow you to play like multimedia. It's got a higher CPU and everything like that. So you get one of these cards, you have to buy this separate, then you have to buy one of these cards here that comes with this little micro SD reader, USB, and then you got your regular games for your 3DS. So just make sure on the package it says 3DS if you have a 3DS. It says DS if you have a DS, and then make sure you always visit the site that's listed on the card and check out what they have to offer. There are different softwares you can download that, in addition to the firmware, like Moonshell, which play like videos and things like that. And then when you finally get it all working with the firmware, most of these cards here allow, you don't need to put a DS emulator on it, meaning you don't need an emulator to run the DS games, because natively the 3DS can run DS games. But if you do want to play Game Boy, then you would put something on it like called Lame Boy. That's a software. It's an emulator, and then you get the ROMs from websites and you download them onto the card into like a games folder. And if you wanted to play SNES, then you would have to get an emulator for that. But basically, if you're thinking about buying one of these, there's a lot to learn about it. Pretty much, I'll show you this setup on my card here. I have some DS games and some SNES games. And don't be confused by the software. Most of the firmware is a wood firmware. That's the name of the firmware. Like Windows is named Windows, Mac is named Lion or something. But this particular card runs the wood software. Okay, so let's place this in. I already installed the firmware, and make sure you follow the picture of which way it goes in, and you pop it into your 3DS, and you open, and then you'll see you have a card spinning around, and in this section you just click it. See how it works. So they have different wallpapers you can use, and here's the micro SD card. So I categorized it into NDS, categorize it into NDS and SNES, and you can use the controls. Now RPG is the actual firmware, and then you have a couple of little tiny folders. Don't worry about that. So RPG, if you hit RPG and you go through it, pretty much you can throw your cheats and your fonts and all that stuff in there. And don't worry about all this stuff. You don't have to play with it really, unless you want to change the skin or something like that. But basically, if you hit the B button, you'll go back a step, and then you notice that the NDS games have N.NDS at the end. Those are the ROMs that you download. They're called ROMs, and they work with emulators. Now the DS, in this particular card, you don't need an emulator because it's built in to the 3DS. If you go back, and I have SNES, you see that I had to install an emulator here, and then you throw the games in the same folder, like I have here, and the games are called SFC.SFC or .SRM, and they're pretty much like 40 gigs or whatever, and you know, some are a little bit larger, some are even smaller. So if you basically hit on the emulator, it will open up, and then you'll be able to pick your games of what you want to play. And you know, I have 3 or 4 games in here, and then if you want to go back, there's a way to hit a couple of buttons to make it go back, but I'd like to come completely out of it and then go back into the card to get access to what's on my card. And then, like I said, you can have you know, media players and stuff like that, but you know, I don't deal with that. If I want to play video, I play it on an iPad or, you know, an Android tablet or something, you know. So let's go back, and you see the NDS games here. They don't have emulators, see, but they have save games, so you can, every time you play a game, it will save right onto the card. And then the good thing about this is, you know, once you completely come out of it, you know, you can pull the, let's let it stop up. You pretty much can pull, you know, when you get back to the main menu, you can pretty much take it out and never act like it never happened. You know, you throw it open, and now the card is empty, and there's no hack. That's what's great about it. So, you know, basically you put in a legit card, like the one we have here, and you could just chuck it in the back, and it'll show up here, and you play the game. So basically, that's just like in a nutshell, you know, what these cards are and what they can do. Look at the description, and I'll show you a list of different sites that you know, that you can buy these cards from. And I recommend this card. It's the R4 3DS, and it's, you know, made for the 3DS, and they were like the first ones to crack the 3DS, so I imagine that's the best one to use. If you want a higher end card, you know, you just go to those higher end cards that have media players and higher chips and, you know, faster processors and things like that. So basically pay around 20 bucks for these things, and I think it's well worth it. You know, you buy a micro SD card separately. This particular card, you can run 32 gigs, and that's what I have. I have a 32 gig card in there, so I'm going to be able to put a lot of games on it. So anyway, that's my short little video about how these R4 cards work. And take a look at the description. Make sure you follow, and I'll see you in my next video.